Welcome to today's MOOC lecture. Today the topic of our discussion is defining identity and culture, power, politics and security perspectives. We'll start our discussion with a brief background. Until late 1980s, the study of international relations did not pay much attention to issues concerning identity and culture. Two factors were responsible for lack of focus on cultural issues in the study of international relations. One factor was materialism and the other factor was rationalism. Now, what is materialism and what is rationalism in international relations? Materialism believes that the material structure of power distribution, such as economic capacity of the states and their military might, determine the behavior of the states. Therefore, ethical factors, cultural norms, they do not play much role in determining the behavior of the states. On the other hand, rationalism believes that human beings, and by extension the state, is a rational and strategic actor. So therefore, states are guided by a rational calculation of costs and benefit. They are not guided by ethical and moral and cultural factors. Much of the international relations theory till late 1980s were rationalistic and materialistic in nature. Now we will look at how the major theories of international relations were materialistic and rationalistic in nature. We'll start with realism. Now, realism is considered to be the most dominant theoretical approach in international relations. And Hans Morgenthau is considered to be the most famous advocate of political realism in international relations. Now, realism is rationalistic as well as materialistic. Realism is rationalistic because of the way it conceptualizes human nature. Realism believes that politics is governed by the objective human laws which have their roots in the human nature. So therefore, in order to understand politics, we have to understand human nature. And what is human nature? According to realist school of thought, human beings are self-interested creatures. And since state is composed of the human beings, therefore state is also a self-interested entity, because the behavior of the individuals also gets reflected in the behavior of the states. Therefore, state is a rational entity. Similarly, realism is also materialistic because the way it conceptualizes national interest. Realism believes that every state seeks to achieve its national interest. So, the primary motive behind state action is national interest. And national power is the means through which national interest is achieved. That is the reason why every state seeks to maximize its own power. Therefore, what counts as far as the behavior of the states is concerned is material power, not cultural, moral, and ethical norms. Next, we'll look at how neorealism or structural realism as an approach has continued this tradition of looking at international relations from the lens of materialism as well as rationalism. Just like realism, neorealism or structural realism believes that human beings are rational creatures and therefore states are also self-interested and rational creatures. And it is materialistic because the way it conceptualizes the international system. The primary argument which neorealism makes is that international order or the international system is anarchical. It is anarchical because there is no central authority at the international level with the power to legislate, with the power to execute legislation, and with the power to adjudicate in case of any disputes. So there is no world government in simple sense of the term at the international level. So therefore there is anarchy at the international level. And because of anarchy, every state finds itself in a self-help scenario where every state has to look after its own security. It cannot depend on any other authority for securing security or for securing its security needs. This gives rise to a kind of security dilemma. And in order to overcome this security dilemma, every state wants to maximize its own power. So therefore, it is considerations of material power which motivate the actions of the state. It is not any cultural, ethical, moral norms or ideas and ideologies which actually motivate the actions of the state as per this neo-realist framework. However, in the late 1980s, there was some kind of new approaches which emphasized the role of culture also in international relations. The end of the Cold War was a key event. The end of the Cold War exposed the intellectual flaws of these traditional approaches to international relations, because none of these approaches could predict or make sense of the momentous change that happened in international relations as a result of the end of the Cold War. It was in this context that perspectives which highlight the role of culture, ethics, ideologies, and ideas became more important in the study of international relations. And this cultural perspective most famously found manifestation in the rise of constructivism as an approach to international relations. So we'll now look at this very important approach, which is constructivism. Now, the study of culture in international relations is associated with this approach of constructivism. This approach mainly emerged in the 1980s, and it became an influential approach in the decades afterwards. It has many advocates, but Alexander Wendt is considered to be the most famous and the most influential advocate of constructivism. Now we'll look at how constructivism conceptualizes world politics. Now, constructivism marks a major departure from the traditional way of understanding international politics. As we have already highlighted, that the traditional and the dominant approaches to international relations, they see international relations in materialistic terms, so they understand and analyze the behavior of the state in terms of material factors of power and security. And cultural factors and ethical norms are not given much prominence in their analysis. Now, constructivism seeks to expose the flaws of these traditional and dominant approaches to international relations, and it highlights the role of culture and identity in global politics. Now, constructivism makes the argument that shared ideas, beliefs, and values have structural characteristics, and they determine and shape the social and political action of the states. Material resources are important, but material resources acquire their meaning only in terms of the structure of shared knowledge in which they are embedded. We can make sense of this argument with the help of two examples. For example, Canada and Cuba, both these states are neighbors of United States. But Canada is a friend of the United States, while Cuba is an enemy state of United States. Now both are neighbors of United States, both are middle-ranking powers. So why this is the case? So simple balance of military power cannot explain this situation. But we can explain this situation if you take into account the ideological commonalities and the ideological differences between all of these states. Similarly, United Kingdom has a large number of nuclear warheads, while North Korea has very few nuclear warheads. But United States consider North Korea to be a bigger threat than United Kingdom. Now why this is the case? Now we cannot explain this by simple military logic or the simple logic of military power. In order to explain this, we have to go deep, particularly into cultural factors. This example shows us that it is not nuclear warheads per se which matter, but what matters is the ideas, the beliefs, the values of the actors which possess nuclear weapons. Now we'll look at the ideas of the most famous advocate of constructivism, who is Alexander Wendt. Now Alexander Wendt's ideas are very important as far as the constructivist approach is concerned. And the basic arguments of constructivism can be seen to have manifested in the theoretical formulation presented to us by Alexander Wendt. Now what he basically argues, or in other words, the central argument which Alexander Wendt makes is that identities inform interest and interest shape and determine actions. Thus, Alexander Wendt highlights the importance of identities in defining interest of states and the importance of those identity-centric interests in defining the behavior of the states. For example, the identity of an academician gives a certain person interest in research and publication. Similarly, the identity of a liberal democracy encourages criticism about authoritarian tendencies, authoritarian regimes, and also a preference for free market capitalism. Thus, Wendt shows that the identity which a state has will have some amount of impact on the interest that will form out of those identities, and those interests will of course shape the actions of the state. In this regard, Wendt gives importance to international norms. And international norms are shaped by intersubjective understanding between actors in international system. And international norms define how states act in a particular situation or act in a particular context. So that is the reason why international norm or analysis of international norms is important in international relations. Now, how international norms are produced in international relations? Wendt shows that international norms are produced because of commitment to shared ideas between states or in other words, through intersubjective understanding between states. And international norms also define the structure of a particular context in which the states make certain decisions. And international norms are important also for a state because every state wants to create a certain identity for itself. In other words, international norm or norm is basically a standard appropriate behavior for a state actor with a certain or with a given identity. For instance, human treatment of prisoners of war is now an international norms. It is widely recognized in international relations that civilized and democratic states have a responsibility to treat prisoners of war with dignity, with respect, and prisoners of war deserve a human treatment. They must not be tortured, they must not be executed. This is an international norm. If a state violates this norm, then question will arise about the civilized or democratic credentials of that particular state. So a state which wishes to be recognized as a responsible, civilized, and democratic power will treat the prisoners of war with dignity and respect. So, in this way, norms define what actions are possible in a particular situation, how a state imagines what actions it can take in a certain situation. Therefore, it is not only about simple balance of military power, which influences the actions of the state, but international norm, which is based upon shared understanding between states, have a role to play in determining what are the actions which are available to a particular state in a certain situation. In other words, it defines what is the realm of possibility and what is the expansion or what is the boundaries of the imagination of a particular state. Because a state has to look after its own image, it has to maintain a particular identity, a particular image. Now, we'll discuss how Alexander Wendt engages with the dominant understanding of international relations. Wendt makes a serious, or Wendt undertakes a serious intellectual engagement with Neorealist school of thought. And as we have already highlighted, Neorealism believes that in the international system there is anarchy, and because of anarchy, every state finds itself in a self-help scenario. And this self-help scenario leads to a kind of security dilemma, and which further leads every state to seek more and more power for itself. Wendt argues that there is no necessary connection between anarchy and self-help. Whether anarchy will lead to self-help or not cannot be decided in prior. It cannot be decided a priori. Anarchy may lead to self-help, anarchy may not lead to self-help. We cannot say, according to Wendt, that anarchy will necessarily lead to self-help. He categorizes anarchy into three, or he kind of classifies anarchy into three categories. He says that there are three types of anarchy which exist in the international system, which can exist in the international system. One is the Hobbesian anarchy, one is the Lockean anarchy, and one is the Kantian anarchy. Now, Hobbesian anarchy is based upon the ideas of Hobbes, Lockean anarchy is based upon the ideas of Locke, and Kantian anarchy is based upon the idea of Immanuel Kant. So what happens in Hobbesian anarchy? In Hobbesian anarchy, according to Wendt, every state sees each other as enemies, and every state wants to eliminate each other. So it is a war of each against all, or war of all against all. So this is the Hobbesian anarchy. And Wendt argues that this kind of anarchy prevailed in the international system till 17th century. Then emerged a new kind of anarchy which Wendt calls Lockean anarchy. In Lockean anarchy, which is, the idea is of course drawn from the ideas of Locke. So in Lockean anarchy, every state sees each other as rival, but the states do not want to eliminate each other. They try to coexist with each other as far as possible. And this type of anarchy, according to Wendt, emerged after the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. And this anarchy prevailed till the Second World War. After the Second World War, according to Wendt, a new kind of anarchy again emerged. And this is what he calls the Kantian anarchy. Now, in Kantian anarchy, every state tries to see each other as friends and try to maximize cooperation. They try to cooperate with each other and they try to build a peaceful international relations. And this anarchy emerged after the Second World War. After classifying anarchy into three categories, Wendt argues that whether anarchy will lead to self-help or not depends on what kind of anarchy is prevailing. And in Hobbesian anarchy, there is of course a possibility of a self-help system, but that possibility is not as strong. That possibility is not very much strong in Kantian type of anarchy. So the Hobbesian anarchy stands for a very weak commitment to shared ideas between states, while Kantian anarchy stands for very strong commitment to shared ideas between states. And when there is a possibility for greater commitment among the states towards shared ideas and beliefs, there is greater possibility of world peace. So this is how he conceptualizes the international system and international anarchy, and he makes a critique of the dominant power and security perspectives which exist in the study of international relations. Now, we can conclude our discussion by saying that perspectives which emphasize the importance of power and security are still dominant in international relations. But cultural perspectives which also highlight the importance of ideas, ideologies, values, norms, culture, identity, they are no longer peripheral to the study of international relations nowadays. While talking about identity and culture in international relations, we have to understand that the primary actors in international relations are considered to be nation state. Now, nation is an identity. Similarly, in today's world politics, we see also the rise of civilizational identity in states like India. India and China are not considered by many as typical nation state, but they are considered to be civilizational state. Therefore, civilization becomes an important category in order to understand behavior of actors like India and China in the present world system. And identity and culture are not always constructed. Sometimes they are primordial. Therefore, they are natural belongingness to our culture, to our identity that we often feel. And that natural belongingness also gets reflected in the policies of the states. Therefore, while power and security remain important in analyzing the actions of the state, but if you only focus on power and security, we'll end up developing a one-dimensional understanding of global politics. In today's global politics, while state remains the important actor, possibly the most central actor, but there are many other factors, many other actors which play increasingly important role. So therefore, there is a need to consider non-state-centric perspectives. And it is in this context, culture and identity become important analytical tools to make sense of how states behave in contemporary international relations.